Praise be Jesus Christ and Mary Immaculate. Welcome to the third Sunday in Lent. We're going to read from the Gospel of John, chapter 2, verses 13 to 25. In chapter 2 of the Gospel of John, in the episode of the wedding in Cana, with the transformation of water into wine, Jesus really does something new, because the evangelist presents to us a change of mindset about how God and God's people relate to one another. Water was used for purification because the law continually made people always feel guilty, always in debt, always in need of purification in order to obtain the love of God that they deserved. Wine, on the other hand, represented the generous, free love of God that was there to inebriate spiritually everyone in the joy of being loved with God. It was a way to celebrate being God's chosen, God's children. And the God of Jesus does not show his love based on people's merits, but according to their need. Jesus' love is equally free for everyone who is in need. This new way of relating between God and God's people now presupposes a fading away of the old institutions that continually kept people thinking that they were unworthy, that they needed to somehow gain God's love by sacrifice, by earning God's love in some one way or another. And the first one of these institutions that had to go away was the temple in Jerusalem. Let's read what the evangelist John says in chapter 2, verse 13. Meanwhile, the Jewish Passover was approaching. The name is strange because in the Old Testament, this feast is simply called Passover. It's a celebration of the liberation of God's people through the desert by the hand of God. Why in the Gospel of John is it called the Jewish Passover? The word Jewish or Jews in the Gospel of John does not mean the people or the religion. It means the religion institution. It means the religious authorities. And therefore, by the evangelist John calling it the Jewish Passover, it's because this feast really benefited the religious leaders of the people. During these celebrations, the people were exploited in order to buy and to do things so that they could celebrate appropriately. So those who celebrate are the leaders because they're cashing in on the people who have to forcibly buy animals for sacrifice. Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and it is the first time that Jesus enters a temple according to this evangelist. And the evangelist already tells us that Jesus and the temple are incompatible. One requires the elimination of the other. The temple made of stone and the body of Jesus, which is the real dwelling of God, cannot coexist. Each time that Jesus enters a temple, there is a situation of conflict, so much that while in the temple, it is the religious leaders who will try to stone Jesus, and eventually that they plot to kill Jesus. Jesus found in the temple sellers of oxen, sheep, and doves. Why? Because the law of Moses prescribed that every male Jew was obliged to go to Jerusalem and offer the lamb of sacrifice in occasion of Passover, and not only lambs, but also other animals according to how much money you had. Jesus finds that the sellers of sheep, oxen, and pigeons and money changers were all sitting. They were installed in the temple and they had plans of going nowhere. They were literally installed in the temple. Jesus helps us understand that the true God of the temple was money, was mammon, and not his Father. Jesus made a whip of ropes. In the past, the awaited Messiah was sometimes characterized or described as with a whip in his hand, a whip in which he was to punish sinners when he came. Well, Jesus came, and Jesus made a whip of ropes, but it wasn't the sinners that he punished. But as a matter of fact, he doesn't punish anyone. Jesus cleanses the temple of what was really defiling it, the sellers, the representatives of an institution that was profiting from making people feel unclean or unworthy of God. Jesus expelled all the sellers from the temple. First, the sellers of sheep, because sheep were an image of the people of God that Jesus came to free from the fold that kept them captive. Then the oxen that represented the hard labor that people had to endure in order to please God. He threw the money changers' money to the ground. For Jesus, money had become the god of the temple, and he told us already that you cannot serve both God and mammon. They were incompatible, as the temple and Jesus were. Why does Jesus do this? Why does Jesus need to cleanse the temple? Because the God of Jesus, his Father, and the God of the temple are not compatible. The God of the temple is a God who demands and asks for money and life from everyone, especially the poor and the sinner. People had to continually give in order to appease such a God. Religion had become a transaction and not a relationship. The God of Jesus is a God who gives, the God who offers himself, a God who does not ask for life, a God who gives his own life for all, especially the poor and the sinner. Why are Jesus and the temple incompatible? In the temple, there is a demanding God, a God who continually demands offerings and sacrifices. The Father of Jesus will be completely different. He will not ask for sacrifice, but he will be the one who offers himself as a sacrifice to all, especially the poor and the sinner. And although some consider the law a rigid set of precepts, it is more a collection of directives that have grown out of the experience of the people. To say that Jesus is the wisdom of God means that God's wisdom is made known in him and that he is the way that points to God. We have to look at Jesus if we want to find God. And while laws often embody distinctive cultural values and customs, as the wisdom of God, Jesus crosses all cultural boundaries and breaks down all cultural distinctions. As the wisdom of God, Jesus fulfills all expectations of the code of law. He brings us to the spirit of the law in which God intended for us to live by. Both the law and the temple witness to God's power in the lives of the believers. The temple at one point was a very important place that reminded people of God's will to live among them. However, both institutions pale in light to the light of Jesus, who is identified as the power of God, as the wisdom of God, as the presence of God. And this divine power is not revealed just in lofty precepts or in magnificent stones, but rather this power and this wisdom of God is manifested in the broken, pierced, whipped, and killed body of Jesus Christ. How willing are we to accept him in his power if he comes to us in this manner? God bless you.